Hello, everyone.
Hey guys, welcome into the podcast. On today's podcast, we are going to be talking about the question you have to ask yourself before committing to a domestic discipline relationship.
But of course, before we get to that, if you're enjoying this content, would you please hit the like button? And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, would you hit that subscribe button? Because every time you hit the subscribe button, it makes me smile.
If you want to help support us doing what we do here on the podcast and our ability to continue to do it, the best place to do that is over on Patreon. With your Patreon membership, you get Patreon exclusive bonus content, as well as the post show that is also open to YouTube members. So that's another way that you can support the channel if you're interested.
So this is a topic I think that I don't know if we've never covered or we haven't covered in a really long time.
I don't think we've ever covered this topic from this angle of what do you really need to ask yourself before signing up for a domestic discipline relationship, because it's not necessarily the path of least resistance. Domestic discipline is not an easy relationship style for either the taken in hand or the head of household.
It's definitely one of those things that before you do anything in life that requires a big shift, because it is going to require a big shift, I think, you really do have to take some time to think about it. And you really want time to sit down and talk with one another about this. If you feel like this is something you can quickly just turn the wheel and get on that path, I wish it was that simple, but it really is not.
Like anything in life, you have to make adjustments over time and see growth over time. You're not going to be able to be where another couple is immediately.
Right.
And you're not even going to be where you want to be immediately. And so it is a commitment. It is a long-term commitment. And it's something that takes a lot of effort to change and shift, because you, in many cases, you are changing how you interact as a couple, how you communicate, how you conduct yourself, habits, even things that you think are personality traits that might just be kind of bad personality habits. You're having to change a lot, and it's not effortless. It does take considerable effort, and you need to kind of know that going in. We always talk about the benefits of domestic discipline, and there are so many benefits. The improvements that we have seen in our own relationship and in the relationships of others cannot be unmatched. And it only has come through domestic discipline. Does that mean that we think that everyone should be in a domestic discipline relationship? No. If you should only be in a domestic discipline relationship if you want to be, but if this is something that you desire, you will see growth in your relationship. You just will.
And I think that's a great way to segue that. I think the first question that you have to ask, and this is really important, is both sit down and say, because this is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort, is this for us? Is this really something that we think is going to be beneficial to our relationship? And it's okay if the answer is no. But obviously you're sitting here watching this because maybe you're considering it. And so that's the big question, although it may seem obvious to say, is this for us?
Do you really want this? And do you want everything that comes along with it? Because I think a lot of times we want the benefits, we want the end result, but we're not necessarily willing to sign up for the path to get there. And so you really have to look at everything that domestic discipline requires and ask yourself, do I want this? Is this something that I can actually commit to? And I think that that's the second question.
Right, exactly.
Is, can I actually commit to doing my side of what is required in this relationship? For me, that is, can I commit to submitting to my head of household, giving up control, relinquishing basically a certain level of autonomy in my relationship? Of course I can communicate to my head of household. Of course I don't lose my voice. I've talked a lot about that, at least on my bonus content. I don't know if I've ever really dived into that here on the podcast, but in my bonus content I really do dive into, you do not lose your voice in a domestic discipline relationship just because you're taken in hand. You do still have a voice in your relationship, but it's relinquishing the final decision to your head of household. And is that something that I'm really willing to do as a taken in hand? And I think as a head of household, what are the things that you have to ask yourself?
The biggest thing that you have to ask yourself as a head of household is, am I willing to make sure that I structure my life better? That I'm willing to not make excuses for being tired, for having maybe a long day. Basically, the head of household, this is the reason this is such a big commitment, and you have to ask yourself if you're ready for something like this, is that I didn't realize when we first started this relationship that there were a lot of things that I didn't even realize I wasn't doing, that in a way I was being lazy. Now, I don't want to say I was intentionally being lazy, but there were just things that I was letting pass, that in order to start a domestic discipline relationship, you have to pay attention more. You have to start honing the skills of of observation, and you have to really hone your skills of really mind over matter, as they say, meaning there's a lot of times where, and we've talked about this on the podcast many times before, where you may not have the feel physically like you're going to be able to do something, and you have to have mind over matter. You have to be able to tell yourself, no, in order for the benefit of our relationship, for the good of our family, for the good of our dynamic, I have to put that aside now and take care of business, either through, correction, punishment, whatever it might be. And so as the head of household, you have to say, am I willing to essentially put aside some selfishness that I've had? Because that's really what it is that we're, at least from my point of view, it's hard sometimes to look in the mirror and realize, oh, one of the reasons I didn't do something, or having a hard time reluctantly wanting to do something, is I'm going to have to give up some things in order to help my spouse and to help our relationship get better in a domestic discipline relationship. And you have to be willing to take that first step in order to progress forward.
So I think really the theme here is that I have to be focused more on fulfilling my duty to you, and you have to be focused on fulfilling your duty to me.
Exactly.
Neither one of us is egocentric in this relationship or self-focused. I think also as a head of household, you have to really commit to setting forth a vision for the relationship.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And honing the skills of self-management, so then you can manage your taken in hand and your household. I
will tell you, and Aria knows this, that I for the longest time thought I was a very organized and very systematic type of person, and I was to an extent. But definitely when you start this dynamic, it just brings you, and this is a good thing, you go through a growth where you realize, wow, I need to take that to the next level. I need to climb to that next plateau of even being more detail oriented, even being more systematic in everything I do. And as I was saying earlier, I'm not a very observant person. And I'm still not in some ways, but this dynamic is helping me get better at that. But that was definitely something that I had to constantly ask myself when we first got in here is, do I have the ability to really be more observant? Because I really do have to pay attention more, especially to her behaviors and her emotions and different things like that.
And I think maybe that leads into a new question, which is, am I willing to develop new skills in order to succeed in my relationship?
That's a big one. And what do you think some of the new skills that you had to develop or still having to develop as a taken in hand?
Communication. That's a big one for me, is the ability to communicate effectively, to manage my emotions, to not let my emotions kind of dictate how I communicate, how I interact with you, how I set the tone for the home. There's this old saying, and I don't know how common it is, but if mom ain't happy, nobody's happy.
We've heard that before.
And that is because as the, mom of the home, as the homemaker, I do set a certain tone of our home, and I have to be willing to not only come under your authority and realize that I do have a responsibility to manage my emotions, and you are going to hold me accountable to that. It is a skill that I had to learn in order to become more even-tempered, to be, in more of a controlled place with my demeanor and my emotions.
And for head of households, we've already kind of talked about a little bit of some of the skills that you have to develop, but Aria just touched on it. And part of her being able to grow as a taken in hand is you have to grow and acquire new skills as a leader. You have to learn leadership in a different way. We're just not taught anymore as guys how to be good leaders, how to be heads of our household. And so these are skills that are definitely not out there, that you can't find just around the corner, and you have to acquire them with experience And I can tell you a lot of failures more than successes, but you have to be willing to just put yourself out there. As I've always said before, if leaders are going to receive all the glory for winning, they also have to receive all the criticism for losing. And so you have to be willing to put yourself out there in such a way that when you fail, to be able to own up to that and learn from that and continue to move forward. And that is a hard skill to learn, and I'm still learning that.
I also think that one of the things that I have really developed over time is being more organized. Again, I felt like I was a fairly organized person, but I was more of like the organized chaos in my earlier life, where things looked very chaotic from the outside, but I knew where everything
That's
was
true.
and where everything was going.
She did, absolutely.
And being in this relationship has just required me to be more organized, to put systems into place, to, use checklists and just keep myself on track in a better way. And I know that I've talked to a lot of other taken in hands that would say that this has really been a skill that they've developed also. And it's only through the use of accountability. And it's only through I don't want to say the threat of punishment, but the knowledge that there will be consequences if I don't follow through in these systems. And that is what helps me develop these skills.
Absolutely, and I would say obviously that obviously goes hand in hand with the head of households. Systems is the name of the game in order for this to succeed. But to develop systems, as we've talked about, and it starts going with your rules and your pillars, which we've talked about before. All these systems just take time to cultivate. They take a lot of energy, a lot of mental energy, and being willing to constantly tweak. One of my favorite books that I've read over the years is The Zen, The Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And the basics of that book is basically that it just follows this guy who loves riding motorcycles, and he goes on a journey, but he has to stop and he has to constantly tweak this motorcycle in order to keep it running and keep it working properly. And and it's just a nice metaphor for life. And I think that really works here in domestic discipline. It's something that you're constantly working on and you're constantly tweaking. And I think that leads also to another question is this is not the norm. So are you willing in order to embark on a domestic discipline relationship to go against the norms that you see out in our culture? And again, we're not saying, we said this before at the beginning of the podcast, we're not saying that everybody should be a part of a domestic discipline relationship. We're not out there saying, well, the reason everybody is failing is because they're not viewing a domestic discipline relationship. Do we see value, and we have seen value in people adopting this? Absolutely. But if you're asking this question, you are going to go against the grain, as they say, or swim upstream, because this is just not the norm. So are you willing to put yourself out there and go against the social norms, especially?
I think that that's a really good question, because this is not something that you can necessarily talk to just anybody about.
Right.
This isn't something that you can go to your best friend and talk through in most circumstances. Yeah. I have known people that they really do value their friends kind of understanding the dynamics of their relationship, and they are willing to potentially lose friendships if that doesn't work out. But for the most part, this is not something that you're talking to a lot of people about. So you have to be willing to just understand that you're not doing something that most people would consider normal. And you're not going to be able to have that sense of connection to people in your real life. Now, we have found a huge amount of value in online communities, especially the Discord server that we have built as part of our Patreon membership. We have found a lot of value in that, because it is something that you sometimes need to talk through and be able to connect to other people on. But that's not going to happen with your current friend group, most likely.
Right.
And even if your friends do know, they might not understand fully. And so it's just something that you have to be willing to be so strong in your own decision, and that you're willing to not necessarily need the validation of other people.
Exactly. And, that's hard, because as people, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, we want to be validated. We want to feel like we're a part of something. We want to feel that we're valued, that we have a group of people that see us, right? And hold maybe some of the same values as we do. In other words, we don't want to be alone, right? So that's normal. But as Aria was just saying, because this is a little different, you are on the minority with this, and there's nothing wrong with that. But obviously, that's why we've created the Discord community and started this podcast, was to try to help people realize that they're not alone. They may be part of a minority, but they're not alone, and there are people out there that have embraced this relationship, and we're all on the same journey. But even that said, to kind of get back to what we were saying, it's still at times going to feel like a lonely journey. At times, it's still going to feel like, gosh, I just don't know if this is worth the effort and the time. That's why you really have to ask the question, are you willing to go against social norms? Because that alone sometimes makes you feel like, wow, is this even something that we want to continue to do? Because it is so much harder to go against the grain and to swim upstream, as they say.
I just wanted to touch on one thing. When you said that we're not saying that this is for everyone, I think that the values that we hold within our relationship is that of healthy relationships.
Absolutely.
Communication, connection, all of the things that we talk about outside of the actual discipline. I would say that that is kind of for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. The values.
Yes, the values behind it. Now, what we're not saying is that everyone has to include discipline in their relationship in order to gain those things. We just found that that's the easiest way for us to have come to this point in our relationship. And there are other couples out there who would say the same. And so if you are kind of considering domestic discipline, just know that it's not a bad thing, and it can be a really, really good thing for your relationship.
Maybe one of the next questions that you want to ask before going into domestic discipline.
Are you willing to hold and receive accountability in the form of discipline or punishment, physical punishment specifically?
It's a good question.
I think that anytime you are imposing a consequence on your taken in hand, or your wife, or whatever word you want to use, we use the term taken in hand because it is very specific to this dynamic. But if you are going into this dynamic and you are going to embrace the use of consequences, both physical and non-physical, it is a shift in how you operate as a couple. Before domestic discipline, other than talking through things and maybe having very tense conversations, arguments that we then resolve and forgive each other and all of those things, there was no further consequence for really anything.
That's true. That's true. And the issue with that is that life is all about having consequences for good and bad actions, right? Like we associate that word consequences with only bad actions, but you get good consequences from good actions, right? And so one of the things that you have to remember is that is just kind of a norm that we try to get away from. But in domestic discipline, it's something that you have to embrace, and you have to realize that that really is just a part of not only the dynamic, but the part of that growth.
It is. And you have to be willing to not only negotiate what is and is not acceptable as far as discipline is concerned when you're setting up your relationship, but you also have to be willing to accept those actual tangible consequences. You know, when we were talking about this, you had to agree to spank me.
Yes.
And that's
right.
not something that a lot of men are comfortable with at
Right.
first. Now, is that something that is a skill? That's another skill that you learn, is the ability to deliver an effective spanking, right? But I also have to be willing to accept that.
Yes, that's very, very true. If either, and this is where it will not work, and you may need to have more conversation, or you're not ready to embrace domestic discipline, is exactly what Aria just talked about. There's that two-way street. Is your head of household willing to follow through with the consequences and do the spankings and hold you accountable to all of those things? And is your taken hand willing to say, yes, I'm going to submit to that. I'm going to take the spankings for the corrections and the punishments. And if either of you are hesitant there, it's probably not time yet maybe to do a domestic discipline relationship.
And that has to happen consistently. It has to happen every single time. You have to be willing to follow through. And as a taken in hand, I have to be willing to accept that and submit to it, get in position and receive punishment. with a certain level of standard that we have set for what that means in our relationship. And so you have to ask yourself, is that something that I am really willing to sign up for?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so one of the things that we want to end with this podcast today, the question that we want to end with is, are you willing to fully commit to this? Commitment is tough, as we know, and it should not be taken lightly. That's the other thing.
That really is the ultimate question. That is the question you have to ask yourself. Are you willing to commit to everything that domestic discipline means and what it means to actually fully embrace this as a new way of life?
And what we mean by that is we've talked a lot about on this podcast, you all have seen, especially those of you who have been with us from the very, very beginning. You've seen our growth. And a lot of people, and this is not necessarily, I don't want it to sound like I'm picking on anyone, but some people, just like in anything in life, when they start something, they start off really fast and they start going really, really well, and then they kind of stagnate throughout their relationship. They lose that fire that they once had. They lose the commitment to growth. They lose the commitment to the relationship, and it just kind of stagnates. And maybe they're still doing domestic discipline, but it's not being effective. They're not willing to go to that next level, either out of fear or out of laziness, or maybe they're just tired because, as we said earlier, this relationship, this kind of dynamic takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of constant willingness to move forward and, again, to actually embrace the growth, which growth, as we know, is not easy. And so we've seen a lot of couples where their relationship is still good. It's not bad, but it's kind of stagnated, and they just don't want to go to that next level for whatever those reasons, because they've lost the commitment to want to really be a part of this dynamic and make it work and embrace that growth. So are you willing to not only commit to this lifestyle, but commit to the journey? That's the biggest thing. Commit to the journey. The journey is hard to commit to.
It is. And now that's not to say that if you find yourself in a lull or in a period of stagnation, that you can't come back from that.
We've been there many times.
We have. Our relationship definitely has gone through periods for whatever reason. Either domestic discipline got really hard or life got really hard. And our relationship ended up taking a back seat because we were so distracted by other things going on, and we weren't very good at balancing back then. I feel like we're in a much better place with that now.
Very much so.
But we have gone through periods of stagnation. We have not had this like linear trajectory of growth in our own relationship. We've gone through ups and downs. That does happen. That's why we started incorporating boot camps, to be honest, because that's a way for us to kind of restart and jumpstart that growth and that motivation again. You don't have to use boot camps. You can just realize that you're in a point of stagnation, have a serious conversation, and recommit yourselves to the process. But you want to make sure that you are assessing that, evaluating that, and always striving for the next best thing, right? You want to make sure that that good enough is not good enough. And unless it is, I mean, there are some couples that they're happy with just getting to a good place and that being enough for them. But really, to see the best benefit, to see the best relationship that you can possibly have, you always want to be striving for the next best place to be.
And that's just the part of the journey. Again, that's just part of growth, and that can be very, very difficult. But again, these are all the questions that you want to ask before starting a domestic discipline relationship. And if you're not quite there yet, no reason to get upset or anything like that. We would just want to encourage you to say, if you're not there yet, that's okay. Just keep tuning in, keep listening, and that is a part of the journey as well. We spent a lot of time thinking about this before we embarked on it. But just remember, when you embark on it, you are going for that commitment, but the reward it's hard sometimes at the end of the journey. You have to take a moment and rest. But the rewards that we've reaped from this lifestyle, I think that I can't even put into words how beneficial it has been to our relationship and the relationship of others.
The benefit far exceeds the amount of effort that we've had to put in.
That's a great way to say it. Absolutely.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to join us on the post show, links to do that is down below, either through YouTube membership or over on Patreon. Like I was saying, Patreon gets you much more than just the post show, so it is a better membership option, but you do have the option of YouTube membership as well. And we will hopefully see you over in the post show. If not, we will see you next week.
See you later.